Sounds like a winter wind is a-kicking up out there. Finally, temperatures below 100 have come to Florida. Huzzah! I can break out my heavy winter coat now for a change. But, while I try to pick out the perfect winter chapeau to go with my dapper setup, let's get some stories around a cozy fire with me, Dr. Plague. Welcome to Cozy Horror. Let's get you started with some great stories and some great times. This one's not exactly in the season, but I suppose it is a holiday, and it does star my lovely wife, so let's give it a read, shall we? I'm sure all of us have been the subject of some unwanted attention. I can't relate. All the attention I get here is always so nice and wonderful. But some of us may have had someone we'd like to get rid of. Maybe had a stalker even, though I hope none of you have. But let's give a listen as we hear about her problem with a fellow who calls her m'lady.
I was not at fault here. I don't understand why the universe has decided that I should suffer. As I lay here and listen to his throaty, phlegm-filled breathing, I consider again the idea that ending it might be best. It wasn't my fault. I didn't cause what happened to him. He should have just left me alone. Now I'm the one who must suffer his company, maybe for the rest of my life. The day had started with a hard slap of rocks against my window, and I loosed a loud sigh as I thrust the covers away from me. Every morning. Every goddamn morning. I hadn't had to buy an alarm clock since I moved in, so I suppose that was something. As another handful of stones cascaded against the window, I swung angrily out of bed and shifted the curtains open. I did not open the window right away. You only made that mistake once. The pudgy man-child on the sidewalk had just reared back to throw another handful when he saw the window open and smiled happily. That smile showed me every inch of his yellow teeth, his spotted gums, and the spit that covered his half-rotten teeth in a sheen of translucence. He was dressed in his usual attire, and I imagined I could smell him from 2 floors up. He wore ratty Chuck Taylor sneakers, cargo shorts in February that likely hadn't been washed since his mother had bought them from JCPenney, a ratty black trench coat that covered his grease-stained t-shirt depicting a busty anime girl who seemed overjoyed to be stretched across his voluptuous C-cup breasts, and a wispy beard that made his face look dirtier somehow, and the battered black fedora that capped it all off. This is what he had worn, or some iteration of it, every day since we had first met 2 years ago, and I shook my head as he waved a pudgy hand at me. "Good morning, m'lady." He knew my name. I'd told it to him 1,000 times, but he always insisted on calling me m'lady.
Kenneth, what the hell do you want?
I was grumpy about being woken up, and sour about Kenneth being the first person I saw 9 mornings out of 10. "Well, I just thought that since we worked today, I'd offer to walk you. We're on the same shift again, so just seems like you might appreciate the company." I sighed. I would have appreciated the company. Any company but Kenneth's.
I'm gonna be a minute, Kenneth. A long minute, so feel free to just go on without me.
I can wait for you. I'll be right here when you get done. When you're ready. Unless you'd rather I wait inside. He snorted through a partially clogged nose. I saw the gleam that came into his piggy eyes and shuddered.
I'd rather you went on without me, Kenneth, but since there's nothing I can do to stop you from waiting, I suppose you can just wait on the front porch.
I closed the window then, blocking him out and pulling the curtains closed, as I went to get ready for work. Every day. Every goddamn day. I've been living in this townhouse for the last 2 years, and I should have known that the rent was too good to be true. The lady who showed me the house was very complimentary about the neighborhood. She talked about the convenient garbage pickup, the cost-effective water measures she had installed, the proximity to restaurants in downtown, and all at a cost that was nearly half of the other rentals in the area. I had been attending college at the time, the college being about 3 blocks from my apartment, and it had sounded like a real sweetheart deal. I was moving my stuff the first time I met Kenneth. I say met, but I smelled him before I saw him. Have you ever been next to someone on the subway who maybe doesn't shower regularly, the kind of person who covers it up with body sprays instead of just washing their clothes and wearing deodorant, the kind of person you don't really want to stand too close to because their clothes look like they might get grease on yours if they brush up against you. That was what I was assaulted by as this mountain of a man came wandering over to introduce himself. He was dressed in cargo shorts and a t-shirt that day, the July heat too much for even his trench coat to handle, with a pair of sandals that put his yellow toenails on display. I was carrying a box of books inside when I heard him greet me by name. That should have been my first indication that something was afoot. "Hey, welcome to the neighborhood. I'm Kenneth. My mom said I had a new tenant, but she failed to mention how beautiful she was. Would you like some help?" I had thanked him, but Kenneth's idea of helping seemed to entail watching me move boxes while he talked my ear off about video games, anime, and fantasy roleplay. He was aghast that a girl as worldly as me, whatever that was supposed to mean, had never seen an anime. I admitted that I had watched some Sailor Moon when I was in elementary school, mostly because it was on when I got home. He scoffed at that, though, and waved a pudgy hand at the mention of what he called girly anime. The fact that I didn't play D&D or video games was also a subject he wished to remedy. Thankfully, I had moved all my stuff in by the time he started talking about the third or fourth game franchise, of which he was a super fan, and I thanked him for his help.
I'm going inside to unpack now, so I'll see you.
"Ooh, I can help you unpack if you like." I had been standing in the doorway when he said it, the front door the only thing that lay between him and I. The look that crossed his face when he offered to help me unpack was akin to a cat left to guard a mouse. I could just picture his grubby man-child fingers pawing through my clothes, finding some reason to stumble across my underwear, pressing my shirts to his pug nose, and had to stifle a full-body shudder.
On second thought, I'm pretty tired, Kenneth. I think I'm going to rest and unpack tomorrow. Have a good night.
He started to protest, but I closed the door on him and locked the deadbolt. The door had 3 locks, a twist lock, the deadbolt, and the top chain. I engaged all of them before turning around to make something to eat. I had already decided that I would unpack before going to bed today, leaving Kenneth with no excuse to go upstairs and touch any of my things. His annoyance had become creepy pretty quick, and I did not want him hanging around any more than I could help. I had just gotten to the entryway to the small kitchen when I heard an unsettling noise from the front door. I turned and found the doorknob twisting a little, as whoever was on the other side tried to quietly open my door. I thought about seeing who it was, but my fear had a firm grip on me. Home is where you're supposed to feel safest, and that turning knob negated any safeness I might have felt. I couldn't prove it was Kenneth, but I couldn't prove it wasn't. The turning stopped after a few seconds, and I made a mental note to get a chain for the back door, too. The first 6 months were probably the least eventful. I enjoyed my newfound freedom of having my own space, but I definitely noticed some of the strangeness in the house. I would come home to find things moved or find things missing, and I suspected that Kenneth had been in while I was gone. More than once I would catch a whiff of Axe body spray upstairs, a smudge on something that looked like a fingerprint, or just something moved that shouldn't have been. Kenneth came over to hang out a lot, and I quickly got tired of having him around. He was always overly friendly, almost fawningly so, and I began to suspect that he had a crush on me. He brought over anime or his Xbox, and I have spent many evenings reading subtitles or watching him finish some level on a game. He was annoying, but I felt that he was ultimately pretty harmless, and the movies he brought over were sometimes pretty cool. He seemed harmless, if not a little clingy. Anytime I would start to feel the least bit comfortable around him, though, I remembered that look on the doorstep and began to rethink. I gave his mother a key the first time I changed the locks, telling her I suspected an old tenant was using the key to come and go as they pleased. After I found the chain off the back door, something I was zealous about keeping chained at all times, I didn't bother giving her a key. After that, the intrusions stopped. Then, COVID had happened. The city did the lockdown thing, and suddenly all the classes were online, all the functions were canceled, and I was spending more time than usual inside my apartment. During this time, unfortunately, my grades began to suffer. Some people can absolutely take classes online and do fine, But I'm not one of those people. I was one of those popular girls in high school who liked to bask in a place's environment and social structure. Suddenly, having professors that I couldn't talk to face-to-face was hurting my grades. Suddenly, not having peers to talk to review notes with, and to bounce ideas off of was hurting me. And as my grades suffered, the school threatened to take away my grant. The grant was how I paid for housing, so I doubled down and tried to bring them up again. I studied long hours, watched tutorials on YouTube, and read anything that I could find on the subject matter. But nothing seemed to help. Kenneth also did not help with this particular problem. Despite the order to wear masks and social distance, Kenneth was always trying to come over and hang out like he used to. He wasn't in school, all his friends were already online, and neither he or his mother thought this was more than the flu. I don't know how many times I would look through the peephole and find him maskless on my front porch with an anime box set of something or his Xbox waiting for me to hang out. I tried to be nice to him, but as my grades suffered, so did my mental health, and I started ignoring him after a while. Then, after a horrible semester, my grant was cut, and I was left waiting to re-up next year. That's how we'd come to our current predicament, me working and Kenneth being paid to hang out with me. I came out the front door 45 minutes later to find him sitting on my porch swing, his phone in his hand, and his rocking making the chains grind together annoyingly.
Is that really what you're wearing to work?
It's not like they care. It's Walmart. As long as you show up, they don't care what you have on. He had a point, but I still tried to tune him out as we walked to work together. I had started working at Walmart after my savings started to dwindle. My landlord, Kenneth's mother, cut my rent a little, because of all this pandemic nonsense, she said, with a little scoff. However, it still only floated me another month or so before I needed to get a job. Walmart was hiring, and they needed warm bodies. Kenneth didn't work there right away, but after hearing that I had started working there, he was soon applying for a job as well. Charles, one of my assistant managers, was a gaming buddy of his, and I assumed the source of my constant stock shifts with Kenneth. It was a real toss-up, which one of them I hated more these days. Kenneth was unnaturally quiet on the way to work today. His face had that look that let me know he was thinking about something very hard, and I feared that he would ask me out again. He had asked me out about once a month since I moved in, and I had just started ignoring him, despite his mother's pressure. I got the feeling that she was getting worried about him not leaving the nest, and she hoped that a nice girlfriend would be enough of a mother stand-in to help him get out of her basement and into mine. Sorry, Mama Kenneth, but that dog wasn't hunting in these woods. She could find some other girl to pawn her precious angel off onto. So, m'lady, he said, finally finding his courage, you may have noticed that, Valentine's Day is tomorrow. I rolled my eyes at him theatrically.
It had somehow escaped me after unloading a metric ton of Valentine's Day candy and toys over the past month, Kenneth. But thanks for bringing it to my attention.
Well, I was just wondering if you'd like to be my Valentine this year and go on a date with me tomorrow. I sighed. Every year with this guy.
No, Kenneth. For the 1000th time, no.
Kenneth's face got that look about it that small children get when you tell them no. But why? Don't tell me you already have a date.
Nope, sure don't. I intend to stay in on Valentine's Day since I have the night off.
Well, that's fine. We don't have to go out or anything. We can stay in and rent a movie and maybe cuddle on the couch. And I rounded on him then, my frustration and lack of patience getting the better of me, as I erupted liquid hate all over this yipping puppy of a man.
No, Kenneth, I have told you no 1,000 times, and the answer will always be no. I don't want to date you. I hardly want to be your friend most days, and the thought of you sitting next to me on the couch gives me hives. Move on!
Kenneth just stood there, his face transitioning between barely contained tears and barely contained rage. His mouth seemed like it wanted to say something, but his brain seemed to be holding it at bay. He looked like he was trying to chew himself from the inside out, and the tears seemed to win out in the end. His eyes began to flood with impotent water, the flood falling to his t-shirt as he turned and ran back towards home. He looked like one of those anime characters he loved so much as he fled from his spurning, and I guessed later that that might have been his intention. I let him go, making sure he rounded the corner before turning to head to work. Some of us still had bills to pay. I thought that maybe Kenneth would have learned a little something after my outburst, but he clearly hadn't. I got home very late that night to find him sitting on my porch with a heart-shaped box of chocolates. "M'lady," he wheezed, rising ponderously from the seat, "you've returned to home at long last." The look on my face should have told him everything he needed to know about how glad I was to see him. I brushed snow off the shoulder of my jacket and wondered how long he'd been sitting there waiting for me. It had been chilly when I'd gotten to work, but not really uncomfortably so. That had changed quickly over the last 8 hours, and all anyone at work could talk about was the freezing blizzard that was rolling in tonight. The old-timers were saying that the Weather Channel called for 3 feet of snow overnight, and it had already started to powder as I'd left at 10. I had walked back home with only the streetlights to keep me company, a welcome change from the usual yarking in my ear of Kenneth. Now, it seemed, I would have to get loud with him all over again.
Yeah, you know why I had to stay so late? It was you. You didn't show up for work, so I had to do your job and my job tonight. I had to stock 2 departments in 8 hours, and then, when I couldn't get it done, I had to stay an extra 4 hours and finish your work.
He backed away, holding up the box of chocolates like it was a shield, clearly not receiving the greeting he had hoped for. "Yeah, I kind of had a little freak out when you said you wouldn't be my girlfriend, but I realized that once you had the chance to calm down, you'd come to your senses. And we could plan our date for tomorrow. Here, I got you these chocolates. It's kind of late to make a reservation for anywhere, but, He stopped talking when I slapped the box out of his hand, the half-eaten box scattering across my porch.
No, Kenneth, I will not date you. I will not walk with you to work. I am through pretending to be your friend. Go away and leave me alone. Take a hint, you insufferable man-child. I don't like you, and I don't want to hang out with you.
I walked to the door and keyed it open, blocking it so he couldn't just follow me in. When I turned back to look at him, though, I was a little worried about doing this on the porch. Kenneth was breathing heavily, and I thought for a moment that he might be crying. The breathing was filled with rage, though, and I was suddenly very aware that I was a 5'2" woman yelling at a man who was nearly 6 feet tall and weighed about twice my weight. I suddenly needed to get in the house in a very short amount of time. I needed the door between Kenneth and I. I needed to call his mother, if not the police, and explain to her that her son was on the verge of a restraining order. "What the hell is your problem?" Kenneth bellowed, and I half closed the door as he turned to let his spittle of rage fly at me. "I'm nice to you. I try to be your friend. I bring you gifts. I do everything that a boyfriend does, and you still won't date me. That's not fair. You're supposed to love me. You're supposed to fall in love with me because I do all the things that girls like. I even went and bought the box set of Sailor Moon so we could just sit and watch it together, since I know you like that girly crap." He took a step towards me, and I slammed the door in his face. I had just engaged the deadbolt when he twisted the knob and slammed his full weight against the door, bellowing like a wounded animal.
Go home, Kenneth. Don't bother me anymore, or I will call the police.
He banged on the door a while longer, but I ignored him. When I had finished making myself a bowl of chili, I found that he had stopped pounding on the door. I ate my food, showered, got my clothes ready for tomorrow. On the off chance that we didn't get 3 feet of snow, I would need to go to work tomorrow and deal with Kenneth. He would likely be waiting for me as always, smiling his butter-toothed grin and waiting like an excited puppy for me to come out and play. I was snug in my bed, preparing to sleep, when I heard the music. The music was soft, romantic, and I thought for a moment that it might be something by John Legend. I could hear it coming from right below my window, and I flipped the covers back angrily as I went to have a look. Sure enough, it was Kenneth. He was parked in the snow, a large silver boombox in his hand, and as he lifted it up, bad 80s movie style, I opened the window. We made eye contact, his eyes filled with earnest emotion, and mine filled with nothing but puppy-kicking rage. I opened the window, chill scraping across me.
Go home, Kenneth.
"No," Kenneth said. "Not until you agree to date me."
You're going to freeze out there.
"Then let me in and keep me warm," he said, unable to keep that grin off his face. I just closed the window on him. He'd get cold and go home eventually. The music stopped about an hour later, and I guessed that his batteries had run dry after all that continuous playing. The next morning, I woke up to a sea of white. The snow hadn't been 3 feet deep. The snow had been 5 feet deep, and it spilled over onto my porch when I opened my door that morning. The wind was made of frozen razor blades, the power holding but flickering a little now and then, and I called work to see if I had to be there today. They said that they would be closed for the next few days. They told me to stay safe, and I decided to settle in for a well-deserved couple of days off. I had expected Kenneth to bother me since I was now trapped in my house, but he never came around. I got to enjoy a nice breakfast, and even got to watch some TV, before I was reminded that Kenneth existed at all. The knock came as the laugh track played on my 3rd episode of Friends, and I sighed as I tied my bathrobe so as not to give him any ideas. He would want to come in, pretending like we'd never had a fight yesterday at all, and I would likely have to yell at him again. I was surprised to see that it was Kenneth's mom, Janet, and not her portly man-child when I opened the door. "Hey there," she said, shivering on my porch as she pulled the scarf around her mouth. "I was just wondering if Kenneth was over here." Janet is, quite frankly, the sweetest woman I've ever met. In the 2 years I've been here, she's tirelessly fixed anything that's wrong in the townhouse, brought over food for things like 4th of July or Thanksgiving, and even apologized for Kenneth on more than one occasion. She's like Cartman's mom from South Park. She was a lovely woman, and while aware that her son was a nightmare, there was only so much she could do besides love him.
Not since last night, ma'am.
"Oh dear. Well, I do hope he's okay. He said you two had a little fight yesterday, and he was coming over to try to make up." I gritted my teeth hard enough to hear them creak, but I held in the rage I was feeling so I didn't cook this nice, oblivious lady alive. "Well, if you see him, tell him I was worried, okay?" As she left, I saw that someone had shoveled the sidewalk, and she had made a little path to my door. That was nice of them, but it seemed I really didn't have anywhere to go. The city was buried under snow and basically shut down. It appeared I could be inside for a while, and I decided to settle in and enjoy my time off. The weirdness didn't start till almost sundown. I was making dinner when I noticed a smell hanging around the apartment. I looked around, wondering if I'd forgotten to take the trash out or something. It was a wet smell, with an underlying odor of cologne. It was like someone had tried to cover a mess with deodorizer, and the longer I stood cooking at the stove, the more my head began to ache. The longer I stayed in the miasma, the worse the smell got, and the stir-fry I was making started to swim a little as I cooked it. I ended up eating it a little underdone as I fled the kitchen to the living room. As the swinging door opened, I stopped and basted in the swampy tang of smells from the living room and the kitchen. In the kitchen, it had smelled like funk. In the living room, it smelled like the inverse. Someone had been in my house. Of that I had no doubt. The smell of spray cologne was strong in here, like a pungent wall that surrounded the couch, and as I sat, I could feel something flaking beneath me. It was like sitting in a seat behind a small child, and as I looked, I could see chip crumbs sticking to my pajama pants. They were orange and smelled strongly of Doritos. I set my bowl down as I stood and walked through the house. I could see smudges around the room, especially on my figurines and some of my pictures. Someone with large, greasy fingers had been touching my things, and when I moved past the end of the table near the door, I took up the keychain with the mace on it. The doors were deadbolted, and though I didn't know how Kenneth had gotten in my house, I was certain that he was the source of this. If he thought he could hang out in my house and violate my privacy just to get his rocks off, he had another thing coming. My food was cold by the time I got done, triple-checking every room in my apartment just to be sure. There was nowhere he could have stayed hidden from me, not someone his size, and after spraying some Febreze around, I took my food up to my room and just ate it cold. I felt uncomfortable in the open down there, and as the snow blew and the wind howled, I sat on my bed and listened. At some point, I fell asleep, curling up in my bed as I listened to the silent house around me. When I came to, the lights were off in my room, and the curtains were thrown open to reveal a crystalline moon peeking in. The room was as quiet as the house, but I was aware of a heavy, wet sound as I came awake. It sounded like a dog, one that's been left out in the heat,
and I scanned around to find the source of that heavy breathing. My eyes cast around, looking for the noise, and finally settled on a large black spot in the corner of the room. The darkness there was deep, the pitted murk blighted by a pair of small ovals that seemed to reflect the moon. The breathing was coming from there, and as it got heavier, the darkness seemed to shift unnervingly, like someone lurking in the gloom, trying not to be noticed. "M'lady," someone almost whispered, and I was up and across the room in a matter of seconds. I snapped the lights on, hands reaching for anything I could find to defend myself with. I expected to see him much too close as the lights came on. I expected him to bury me under his weight, pushing me down and feeling his hands as he tried to kiss me, to touch me. I gripped the ceramic vase as the lights came on, preparing to swing it and shatter it against his head as he... There was nothing. The lights came on and revealed nothing but an empty room with an anxious girl looking crazily around for an attacker who wasn't there. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat up and argued with myself until the sun came up. I knew what I had seen. I had seen Kenneth in the corner, heard the same deep, watery breathing I had heard 1,000 times. But I couldn't have seen him. Kenneth was a large and stocky fellow. There was no way he could have gotten away in the split second between the lights being off and the lights being on. This wasn't someone who could squeeze under my bed in a split second or slip into my closet without notice. Kenneth often got winded on walks to work, and the idea that he could quickly get out of my sight was laughable at best. Still, he had been there. That whole next day, I saw signs of someone having been in my house. It started as I finally got up for the day. As I came downstairs, I smelled something getting ready to burn in the kitchen. I pulled my robe around myself and quickly pushed into the cloud of smoke that awaited me. On the stove, smoke billowing up, was one of my good pans. I turned the stove off, jerking my hand away as I grabbed the handle of the pan. It was broiling. The burner turned all the way up, and I grabbed an oven mitt and took the pan off the stove. It wasn't until I put it in the sink that I saw a single blackened pancake at the bottom. A heart-shaped pancake. I was scraping the grit from the bottom of the pan when I suddenly heard an all-too-familiar theme song from the living room. The TV had been off when I got up. The lights dimmed to a soft glow. From under the swinging door, I could hear the TV blaring, and the pulse of bright lights clicked up to the max. I pushed in, expecting to find Kenneth parked on my couch, waiting for me with his big serial killer grin and his excuse of how, "Oh, well, the door was open, so he'd come right on in." But there was no one in the living room when I came through the door. There was, however, an indent in my couch, roughly the size of a large someone's backside. I searched the apartment again, already knowing what I would find, but needing the reassurance that I would find it. There was no one, just me, in my apartment. I turned off the TV and cleaned up the mess, waiting till 9 before calling my landlord, wanting to hear her tell me that Kenneth had come home. I wanted her to answer the phone and hear Kenneth in the background as he loudly whined for food or money or something. I wanted the confirmation that he was home, but I also feared it, because if he was home, then what the hell was going on around here? She answered on the 4th ring. "Hello? Hello? Did you find him? Please say you found my baby." I sighed, my hopes shattered.
"No, ma'am. I was just calling to see if he had turned up."
I could hear her sob before telling me that no one had seen him and how worried she was about him, and to please call if I heard anything. I got dressed and decided to sit on the porch for a while, the house suddenly feeling too small for me. I thought I heard some rustling as I slid out of my pajamas and into some real clothes, but I did my best to ignore it as I made some tea and stepped out into the frigid air. The smoke from my tea plumed up as I sat on the swing that Kenneth had occupied yesterday, letting the cold air clear my head as I tried to read the book I had brought with me. The longer I sat, my eyes roving over the winter wonderland in my own yard, the harder it became to maintain my anxiety. I was making too much out of this. Surely I had been imagining things, or a power surge caused by the weather had turned my TV on, or I'd been sleepwalking or something. The more I let the cold wash over me, the more I assured myself that I was just being silly. As noon came and went, the cold beginning to abate and the snow starting to soften, I went back inside. My stomach was growling for some lunch, but the icy chill from outside made me long for a shower first. I had all but forgotten about my trepidation and anxiety, and simply wanted to be warm and snuggly as I enjoyed the rest of my afternoon. I would have a shower, put on some nice pajamas, make the stew I had set the ingredients out for in the fridge, and then head to bed after a nice evening spent at rest. As the warm water cascaded over my skin, I felt the cold dissipate and the leftover anxiety melting away. The shower had always been my safe place, my relaxation zone, and standing beneath the warm deluge made me feel a sense of peace that I'd been missing before the communion with nature. I washed my hair, lathering myself up, and just stood under the water as the soap and my worries slid down the drain. At least, I did, before I felt someone touch my hair. I have long blonde hair, the kind that falls to about the small of my back and must be meticulously maintained so it doesn't look trashy. If I'm sitting on the couch watching TV, there's probably a brush in my hand, and my hair is flipped over my shoulder. I've always been sensitive about my hair, and I don't let people touch it very often. So when someone ran their fingers through my long blonde mass of wet hair, my eyes snapped open, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. I had felt the slight tug as 2 or 3 thick fingers slid down and parted the wet locks. I slipped as I stumbled forward, catching myself on the wall before I fell and hurt myself. Through the soupy curtain of foam, I looked around for the source of the touch, expecting to see him. I expected to see a bulbous shape leering at me from behind the curtain. But as I swiped the tangled muck out of my eyes, I was greeted with an empty bathroom. I came shakily out of the shower, hands trembling as I reached for my towel. I was shaken badly. I knew what I had felt. Enough men had tried to touch my hair for me to know what it felt like, and I couldn't trick myself into believing I'd just been imagining things. As I slid back into my clothes, the fog still thick around me, I was met with something even less easy to overlook. Written in the steam on the mirror, the lines reflecting my own horrified face back at me, was the word, "M'lady." I ran, half-dressed from the bathroom, and slipped on the surprise waiting for me in the hall. I went down hard on my backside, bruising my tailbone. The floor was covered with something that my wet feet found slippery, and now that I was on eye level with the floor, I could see them. They had been scattered artfully, leading towards my door in a line of red blotches. The rose petals would have been romantic on any other occasion. At the moment, they left me breathless as I leaned against the wall, watching the door creak slowly open. Behind it, the light in my room dimmed. I could see a thick, softly shadowed form, his eyes gleaming as his tongue slid over his thick porcine lips. I vaguely remember tripping down half the stairs, bruising my legs as I ran for the door. I remember grabbing my phone from the end table by the door, the charging cord coming free as I ran for the porch. I remember talking to the operator, my teeth chattering as I shivered on the porch. My hands and feet were numb, my hair getting stiff from the cold, when the lights lit the icy yard. The sun had started to melt the snow, even as it set behind the nearby houses. The lights on the snow looked odd, almost ethereal, and as they approached, I was thankful when someone threw a blanket over me. One of the officers stayed to take my statement, as the others searched the house. As I told him what had happened, I heard the snow crunch as my landlady came over to see what all the fuss was about. The police came from inside a moment later, shaking their heads and telling me they hadn't found anything. Someone was definitely in there, though. There were rose petals all over your bed and a box of chocolates sitting in the center. Someone had planned quite a romantic surprise for you, though I'm guessing the feeling wasn't mutual. I shook my head and started to tell them about Kenneth's ambush on my porch the night before. But that was when I saw him again. The snow had melted some, and I could see him hunched by the fence line. He was staying still, trying not to be noticed, but I had seen him. His ridiculous black trench coat was a dead giveaway, and I screamed as I pointed at him. His mother looked over my shoulder, pushing me aside as she ran towards her son. I grabbed the rail as I watched her go, the cops chasing after her, wondering why he hadn't moved. The jig was up. We could see him. Why was he just sitting there? When his mother started screaming, and the police officer started calling for an ambulance, I knew something was wrong. That was 2 days ago. He was dead, of course. He had frozen to death, waiting for me to invite him inside. They found the boombox sitting around his feet, frozen to the ground. His coat had been frozen to the back of the fence, and he had simply gone to sleep and never woken up. His mother, of course, was quick to blame me. Why hadn't I let him inside? Why hadn't I called her? And on until the police had finally taken her away. I had taken a few things and gone to stay at a hotel for the night. I just couldn't stay in that house, knowing that there was a dead body in my yard. I thought, at the time, that that would be the end of it. They would take his body, and the weirdness would end. Even if his spirit was somehow attached to my apartment, I would just move. His mother wouldn't want me living there anymore anyway, not after I had led to the death of her precious angel. I would just take my things and go elsewhere. When I woke up this morning to find the words "M'lady" written on the bathroom mirror, I knew then that this wasn't attached to my apartment. The haunting had nothing to do with my place at all. He's attached himself to me. Lying here, writing this, I can already hear his raspy, phlegm-filled breath from the corner of the room. It appears that unlike in life, I may be his M'lady after all, unwilling or not.
Hopefully, that last story didn't put you off too much. I just poked up the fire, and by the sound of all that wind out there, it's a lovely day to sit around the fire and hear some stories, maybe. We've all had experiences as children, or maybe even experiences as adults, that remind us that monsters don't just disappear when we become 18. There are monsters out in the world now, though they don't always have big pointy teeth or sharp claws. So, let's hear a story about a child who's drawn us a very nice picture of a monster.
Daddy, look at the picture I drew. I put on my best appraising my son's artwork face and looked down at the picture he had drawn. I recoiled a little when I saw it, not really sure what to make of it. It was a baby head, like a baby doll, but no body was attached to it. The hair was gone, nothing but dots on the scalp, and the eyes were missing and staring openly. A big silver loop like a smile ran through the head, and the bottom was covered with little metal spider legs. I looked at it for a few minutes, wondering what this horrible thing was, but suddenly it came to me, and I felt silly for being so anxious. "Good job, buddy. It's the spider baby from Toy Story, right?" I said, handing it back to him. "No, Daddy, it's the monster that comes to my window at night." I sighed audibly. The monster had become a point of contention in our house as of late. Every night for the past 3 weeks, my son had woken up screaming because there was a monster outside his window. Ever since we had moved into our new house, it had been a regular nightly event, and I had almost started waking up before the screaming started. It never mattered how fast I ran, though. There was never anything there when I arrived. He was always sitting in his bed, pointing out the window and crying about a monster looking in at him. When we got home, he grabbed his tablet and began to watch Mickey Mouse Clubhouse, as he was wont to do after school. I made sure he was comfortable on the couch and not likely to run out the front door as I started washing dishes. Between the three of us, we usually make a fair amount of dishes. I was just finishing up when my wife came home, grimacing at the picture on the fridge as she came in. "That's an interesting piece of artwork," she said, kissing me on the cheek. "Apparently, that's the monster that's been waking him up every night," I said, making her frown as she sat at the table. "Ugh, the monster again. This has to stop. We have to do something." I shrugged, tossing the drying rag into the sink. "I wish I knew what. What if you spent the night in there tonight?" I looked dubiously at her. "What, like on the floor or something?" "No, you could sleep in the other bed in there." I always forget there are 2 beds in my son's room. They were bunk beds, one on the ground level and one on the top. One was supposed to be for guests, playmates, or cousins who wanted to spend the night. The other was for him. In reality, though, it was more of an excuse for my son to pick a bed to sleep in every night. He usually slept on the top bunk, sitting right beneath the window, but sometimes he liked to sleep on the smaller bed at the floor level. "Okay, I guess I'll spend the night in there. Promise you'll reward me in the morning?" I teased. She said she would and giggled when I kissed her on the ear. That reward would never come, though. That night, we went through our nightly routine after dinner. We brushed our teeth, put on our pajamas, and got ready for bed. As I picked up the book and directed him to the loft bed, though, he grabbed my arm and shook his head. I thought he would argue about bedtime. He wasn't a big one for bedtime. Instead, he shook his head and pointed at the bottom bunk. "Can I sleep there?" he asked, pointing at the bunk. I sighed and looked up at the top bunk, wondering how I would get up that tiny little staircase. One look at my son showed me something was seriously going on, though. He looked scared, too scared for a kid his age, and I was kind of scared myself all of a sudden. What was so scary about this bed? This wasn't the first time he'd balked at the idea of sleeping in the loft bed, and I was kind of hesitant to climb into it. I got over that quickly and told him he could sleep on the bottom if he wanted. So we read our Clifford book, I turned out the lights, and swung up into the top bunk as I snuggled down to sleep. For a few hours, I slept fitfully. I was awakened in the dark of the night by a light scratch at the window. It wasn't a loud scraping. It was soft, like something rubbing lightly against the glass as it attempted to get my attention. Maybe a fingernail, maybe a knife tip, but it was consistent in its efforts as it rubbed. After the picture earlier, my mind tried to conjure an image of a baby head with metal spider legs scrabbling at the glass. In my dream, it dug perfect grooves into the window, like a jewel thief's tool in a movie, and it was making progress through the glass. The baby's head had a mouthful of metal teeth to go along with its legs. The teeth gnashed at the glass as the legs cut, and I could do little more than lay there and watch him cut through the transparent barrier. I woke up as he scuttled in, leaping at my face, its twisted metal teeth twinkling. When I woke up, I thought the dream hadn't quite ended. The scraping continued, that soft, whispery sound, and I opened my eyes and glanced at the window. I was covered up, a pillow over my head, and my eyes peeked from beneath the corner of the blanket. I was still half asleep, and as the crust broke away from my eyes, I thought I might still be dreaming. I saw the baby head, metal legs still scrabbling, pressing against the window. I lay still, watching the little creature bounce off the glass. Its scalp was a stubby patch of yanked out hair. Its one blue eye looked straight ahead, placidly, while the other yawned vacantly. The metal legs were bumping and rubbing, making scratching sounds against the glass. They didn't seem as dexterous as they had in my dream. The monster thing seemed like a Halloween decoration, something blown by the wind as it swung from a post. And as I watched it shake and spasm, I noticed the ring from the picture. That thick metal hoop ran through the head and connected it to a thick chain. I followed the chain, and the outline of a person began to come into view. He was framed perfectly against the privacy bushes in front of the window, his clothes blending seamlessly. He was tall, 6 feet at least, and his body was large and looked strong beneath his sweater. His face was doughy and pockmarked as it pressed against the window glass, his tongue wet and forming bubbles as it slid over the filthy glass. His flesh was pressed against the window as he looked into the shadowy room, his eyes searching for something. Thankfully, my son probably never saw him and had only ever seen the strange baby head necklace. If he had seen this strange face pressed against the window, he would have likely never slept in his bed again. The man's eyes found mine suddenly, his crazed look sobering a little as he realized I was not my son. We locked eyes, and I'm ashamed to say I did not deliver some piercing look that scared him away. In my dazed and fearful state, I was just as scared as my son was every night before he started screaming. We stared at each other for a count of 5 before he broke and ran off into the night. The police just left, taking a complete statement and checking the bushes for evidence. My son is asleep in my bed, my wife having wrapped him in her protective arms. I'm sitting on the edge of the bed and setting this to words while it's still fresh. Tomorrow I'm going to the hardware store. I'll be coming back with wood to board up the window. I don't care if this weirdo ever comes back or not. Before I let my son spend another night in that room, I will make sure no one ever peeks through that window again.
It's no real secret that I love when the weather gets a little cold and the wind decides to whip up, because it gives me an excuse to come inside and maybe rest a little and be a little bit lazy. I don't really need an excuse, I suppose, but it's always nice to have one. I'm sure your parents came up with strange stories to keep you in line. My mother had her Wampus Cat and her Soap Sally, and it seems that the parents in the story here had their own boogeyman to trot out when they needed things accomplished. So you be careful that you don't run afoul of Mr. Danvers. I hadn't thought about it until last week, but it seems to have snowballed into something that's gotten out of control. I was looking through some photos while helping my mom move when I saw him for the first time in 15 years. Dad had passed away a few months ago, and Mom was just starting to clean out some of his things. The picture had been taken at a birthday party, my 9th birthday party, to be exact, and it showed my friends and I standing in front of the house and smiling as my mom took the picture. There were about 9 of us, all wearing party hats and ice cream mustaches under our noses, but the happy faces of my friends and I weren't what had caught my eye. It was the gaunt man standing in the window of the living room, the one looking out at us with the empty black eyes and the sinister little smile, the man who had haunted my childhood, though I'd never quite believed in him after the age of 12. Mr. Danver, a specter that my late father had brought to life. I remember the first time I had ever even heard of Mr. Danver, and the memory made my skin crawl. It wasn't scary because of what I had been told, but because of the unwilling way that my father had shared it. I had been 5, and we were getting ready to go to preschool. I hadn't slept well the night before, and I was cranky as I sat at the table and picked at my breakfast. I was wearing half my school clothes, 1 sock, 1 shoe, and I was so far from being ready that when my dad saw me, you could tell that he knew we were going to be late. "Come on, kiddo, we need to get moving. Finish your breakfast, get your clothes on, find your shoes. Let's get on the road." I don't remember what I said to him, something snarky and grumpy, and when he turned back to me, he spoke before he had quite made up his mind to. "You better hurry and get ready before Mr. Danver comes to get you." The silence that hung after that statement was enough to make me turn my head and look at him, and that's why I saw when he slowly put a hand over his mouth. He was looking at me like he'd just sworn, and he was afraid that I would start repeating it. He seemed terrified of what might suddenly come out of my mouth. "Who's Mr. Danver?" I asked, and that seemed to seal the deal. Dad went rigid, not all at once, but slowly, like something petrifying. His eyes stared out at nothing, his mouth opening a little bit as he gasped slightly. His body seemed to be trying to fight whatever was going on and failing, his mind railing against the inevitable. He looked like a landed fish, something struggling to breathe, even as it struggles with the hook that has pulled it from the water of life. And when I asked the question a second time, the hook seemed to find its anchor, and he stopped fighting. "He comes for bad kids, naughty kids, kids who don't listen. He finds where they hide, and they go missing. When Mr. Danver comes to town, you better beware. When Mr. Danver comes to town, you better be scared. He's tall and old, with skin so thin. His hair is wisps, gray as tin. His teeth are sharp, his eyes are black. He'll drag you off, and you'll never come back. When Mr. Danver comes to town, you better beware. When Mr. Danver comes to town, you better be scared." He delivered it all in the well-trained cadence of an off-Broadway actor at an audition. It sounded like something he had repeated 1,000 times, and I realized then that it was something I'd never forget. The scariest part about it wasn't what he had said. It was how he had said it. The voice was so different from Dad's that it was like watching a ventriloquist talk through him. Suddenly, it felt like a stranger was in the house, and I shuddered as a cold chill ran through me. I didn't say anything in the face of that silence, but when I lifted a hand to my eyes, I realized I was crying. Large, silent tears were sliding down my face, and as my dad came out of his trance, he started crying too. He came to scoop me into his arms,
and pressed me to his chest as he repeated the same thing again and again and again into my corn silk hair. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. God help me. I'm so sorry. When Mom came home to find us both watching Disney movies on the couch, she asked why he had called out of work and not taken me to school. When he explained the situation in soft tones as he pressed his mouth against her ear, she joined us on the couch and pulled me into her lap. That was the first night I saw the old specter, but it wouldn't be the last. I woke up with the most profound chill I'd ever felt. It ran up my cheeks like mice feet, and my eyes popped open as I lay in bed. The room was dark, my toys casting shadows across the floor as the moon crept in through the window. But I knew those spooky shapes were not the source of my discomfort. I could almost imagine that I heard the song Dad had sung as it scampered in with the air conditioner in the vents. I could see the dust motes in the moonbeams as they boogied to that haunted chorus, and as I stared at them, that's when I saw him. He was hunkered in the corner, his knees against his chest, his arms resting on his knees. He was looking at me from the pit of shadows where he sat, and when he realized I was looking back at him, I saw a wide grin stretch across his face. His toothy mouth stretched ear to ear, and as he stood up, I could hear his joints popping like kindling wood. His hair set neatly on his head, looking like the hair you saw on zombies in horror movies, and it brushed the ceiling as he stood up. He rose until his head nestled in the corner of that ceiling, his frame all of 8 feet tall. He had a hat in his hand, a hat I would later learn was called a bowler, and his arms were covered in a rich brown suit coat. He was wearing a suit beneath it, but I was only vaguely aware of it. As he rose, the moon casting his features in contrast, I was mesmerized by his eyes. They were dark pits of shadow that looked at me with mirthful knowledge. "Sorry to wake you," he said, his voice sounding like someone who's lost their breath to excitement. "I just wanted a peek. I'm sure I'll get a closer look sometime. Toodaloo." I started screaming then, and when Dad came in and turned the light on, there was nothing in the corner but the star stickers that stuck to the ceiling above the spot. Those stickers never glowed again, and I took them down when I noticed and threw them away. I was afraid he had gotten his taint on them. Dad pulled me into a hug, Mom beside him, hugging me in an instant, and both of them held me until the shaking stopped. After that, I saw him any time I did something disobedient. Sometimes I would see him lurking in the corners of my vision if I said something smart to my mom or dad. Sometimes I would feel those black eyes watching me if I didn't do my chores. There was a time when I heard him laughing after I'd gotten angry at my mom, and I was always quick to apologize and make things right. Mr. Danver made me conscious of my actions in a way that I'd never been before, and I was a better person because of it, I suppose. I never saw him when I was rude to my friends, but just the knowledge that he might be watching me made me forgive more often, and I was less likely to be cruel to others. Sometimes when I thought about cheating on a test or taking something from a store, I would imagine him just waiting to get me and think better of it. It all culminated when I was 12, on the day I ran away from home. I've been looking forward to a sleepover at my friend's house that weekend, an event that was highly anticipated. Matt had one of these for his birthday every year, and a bunch of us would go to his house and eat junk food and watch movies and tell scary stories and just have the times of our lives. I'd been looking forward to it for weeks, and I knew that if Mom found the math test at the bottom of my bag, the one with the big red F on it, I could hang it up. I'd buried it deep in my backpack, but not deep enough, apparently. She had found it before I could make my escape to the party, and we had gotten into a screaming match over it. It was unfair, I told her. I'd looked forward to this party for so long, and it wasn't fair that now I didn't get to go. She said that was too bad, and if parties were more important than schoolwork, then I needed to get my priorities in order. I was so mad, so furious with my mom, that I did the unthinkable before I could remember the specter of Mr. Danver. I told her I was going whether she gave me permission or not, and walked out the door before she could stop me. I ran up the street, heading for Matt's house, listening to my mom call from behind me. I expected her to be angry. I expected her to be upset. Instead, she just sounded scared. She told me to come back, that we could talk about this, but I was in no mood to listen. I was going to the party, whether she liked it or not, and nothing was going to stop me from getting there. It wasn't until I saw him standing under a burnt-out streetlight that I remembered the looming specter of Mr. Danver. When it began to flicker, I realized it had a little more juice in it. In the flickering light, I could see the tall, thin frame as he grinned at me, his translucent skin clinging to his face like a mask. He had his hat in his hand again, his immaculate suit still looking pristine in the flickering light, and his eyes reflected that flicker like a stuffed animal's. He looked unreal, standing in the everyday world, like a piece of Halloween decor that's a little too well made. He was utterly still, his head brushing the bottom of the lamp, but his fingers gave away his excitement. They drummed on the brim of his hat and made him look like a dog preparing to yank his lead and give chase. We stood looking at each other for a count of 5 before I turned and shot off towards home. Mr. Danver was coming after me just as quick, but his lack of footfalls made me panic all the more. I turned to look and saw the too-tall thing eating up the ground. His long legs moved like a spider's, and he ran like a cartoon character in big, exaggerated galumphs. He was gaining on me with every step, his strides twice my own, and I screamed in frustration and terror as I put on an extra burst of speed. To think that a moment of frustration was going to seal my fate forever. I'd been hyperfixated on my behavior for so long, and now a sudden lapse in judgment was going to kill me. "When Mr. Danver comes to town, you better beware." The wind seemed to bring the hateful words to my mind as it rushed past my ears. "When Mr. Danver comes to town, you better be scared." I was scared. I was terrified. When my house came into view, I was afraid that I would get snatched within view of the front door. Mr. Danver would reach out with one long arm and pull me into the darkness, and I'd be gone forever. It would happen just that quick, and no one would know what had gotten me. Correction, my parents would know. They would know, but how would they tell anyone? To admit to such would make them sound nuts and probably make people think that they were responsible for my disappearance. I turned suddenly, going through the gate and running up the walk, and I felt the icy chill of Mr. Danver's hand as it passed inches from me. I took the steps 2 at a time, praying the door would be unlocked, and when Mom threw it open, I leapt into her arms. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Mom. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. Please don't let him take me." I pressed my face against her, not daring to look back into the yard. Mom whispered that she forgave me, but when she talked to Mr. Danver, her voice was a mixture of rage and an old fear. "Get out of here. All's forgiven. There's no misdeed. You cannot take him." I kept my face pressed against my mom, but I still heard Mr. Danver's spidery voice when he answered her. "Another time, then." When I peeked back, he was gone. Dad came home an hour later, getting off work early after Mom called him, but
I was still shaking and sobbing on the couch. "Why?" I asked him when he came in. "Why did you tell me about Mr. Danver?" My dad was quiet for a moment, thinking about his answer, before sighing and saying, "'Cause it's not something I meant to do. It happens. Someday it'll happen to you too as well." "Never. I would never do that to my child." I shuddered as he wrapped me in a hug, but I didn't pull away. "Sweetie, you won't have a choice. I didn't have a choice. My father didn't have a choice. No one has a choice. Once you know about him, the knowledge demands to be shared. His name is dark knowledge, a secret shared by many, and it must be served." That was when he told me how he had come to know about Mr. Danver from his father. I was playing with something on the couch when Dad told me to clean my room. I ignored him, wanting to finish my game, and when he said if I didn't go do it now, he would call Mr. Danver, I looked up, and when he said it, the look on his face was both confused and afraid. Dad, your grandpa, wasn't always the nice guy that you know. He joined AA when I was in high school, but before that he was a drunk. He could be mean when he was drunk, too, and I should have known better than to hesitate when he asked me to do something. Instead, I asked who Mr. Danver was, and when he sang me the little song, it was the soberest I'd ever seen him up until that point. The words were forced out of him like vomit, and when he finished, he threw his arms around me and told me how sorry he was. Dad looked at me, and his eyes were hollow pits. I saw him in my room that night, and it wasn't the last time either. He told me that when he'd told the story to Mom, the one about his father telling him about Mr. Danver, she'd cried and said that she'd seen him too. Her dad told her too, "One day you'll tell your kids. You won't want to, but you won't have a choice. The song is as inevitable as Mr. Danver." "What you got there?" I jumped as Mom came in and found me looking at the picture. I put it in my pocket, not wanting to remind her about Mr. Danver if I could help it. I moved to another box, Mom taking the box of photos I'd been looking through, and I tried to put the name out of my mind. It was easy to do as I worked, but as I sat at home later, still sore from a day of moving furniture and sorting boxes, I started thinking about it. If my parents and I knew about Mr. Danver, did anyone else? I pulled up Reddit and made the post before I could think better of it. I didn't know if you could transfer the knowledge like that, but I wanted to know bad enough to find out. "Hey guys, I remembered something from when I was a kid. I just wanted to know if anyone else had heard of it." My dad told me a spooky story about Mr. Danver when I was a kid, saying he would come get me. My mom knew about it too, but I was wondering if it was something anyone else had heard of, or if it was something that he made up. The post had barely sat for 5 minutes before I got a response. It wasn't the last either. "Yeah, my dad told me about him too when I was little. Seems like I must have had nightmares about it, 'cause I can remember dreaming he was in the corner of my room sometimes. OMG, so weird. That was exactly what my mom called it too. It was weird when she told me too. I thought she was having a seizure. My uncle used to tell me that he would come get me if I was bad. Wasn't there a song or a poem that went along with it too? Yeah, it was pretty catchy, but I can't remember all the words." On and on and on. The thread had about 100 comments, and not all of them were Americans either. Mr. Danver seemed to be something that lived in the consciousness of most English-speaking people, and even if it had a different name, the descriptions they gave were exactly the same. Tall, suited, pale, wispy hair, sharp teeth, black eyes. The description was universal, and the idea that I wasn't alone didn't make me feel any better. If you too have experienced Mr. Danver, then it's already too late. One day you'll tell your kids. One day they will have the knowledge. One day, if they're lucky enough to avoid the icy grip of Mr. Danver, they'll pass it on. The cycle always continues, whether you want it to or not. One day, I too will infect my child with the looming specter of Mr. Danver. That wind's got me in mind for a nap a little later, I think. What day doesn't seem to hit a midpoint with a nice nap, as long as it's had an early point of some fine stories, that is. Switching from scary stories that our parents told us is everyone else's favorite boogeyman, public access television. So, let's hear about a strange yard sale find, and about your new best friend, who will always be there for you, who will always listen, and may just become your greatest addiction. Let's hear a little about Mr. Harzows Corner.
I've been searching for this tape most of my life. I've thought about nothing else since it was taken from me 12 years ago. As I sit in my grandmother's bedroom, holding the familiar red plastic in my hands, I feel a sense of inner peace. I know that my search is over, and that serenity can follow. Mr. Harzows Corner was a show that I watched religiously from the age of 4 to 6. It wasn't some mysterious TV show that I saw on basic cable. It wasn't some scrambled signal I got from a weird public access network. It was actually something I found at a church rummage sale. The box of VHS tapes was sitting on a little table with the words 5 for $1 scrolled across it in permanent marker. I had leafed through it and seen the usual church swap meet stuff. Winnie the Pooh, VeggieTales, all the Disney movies with their cracked plastic windows and dirty fingerprints on the names. But nothing really stood out. I had selected a few Winnie the Pooh episodes when I found the dirty plastic cassette near the bottom. It had a lurid red body, the color similar to old lipstick, and a handwritten name on the front. The black magic marker name read Mr. Harzows Corner, and it immediately caught my attention for some reason. I picked it up and just looked at it for a moment. I had grown up in an age of strange cassette tapes. Nickelodeon put out the chunky orange cassette tapes that often had episodes of Rugrats or Wild Thornberrys, and even some of the VeggieTales cassettes were different colors, depending on whether they were holiday specials or not. This one, however, seemed odd right off the bat. The plastic just felt thick in my fingers, and I remember both wanting to put it down and never put it down again. Finally, after 10 minutes of just looking at it, I did put it down, and I grabbed 2 cassettes featuring episodes of Barbie's Dream House, a Nickelodeon cassette featuring the Rugrats, and 2 with handwritten names saying they were old Winnie the Pooh cartoon episodes. I brought them to my mom, and after looking over them, she nodded and gave me $1. I had taken them to Miss Wazowski, the cheery old lady who often organizes these rummage sales, and she put them in a plastic grocery bag and smiled at me as I walked to rejoin my mom. It wasn't until I got home that I realized there was a 6th tape in that bag, though. I had just turned on the VCR TV combo in my room when I realized there was an unfamiliar, yet very familiar red cassette tape at the bottom of the bag that had definitely not been there when I'd checked out. I picked it up and saw that Mr. Harzows Corner was scrawled across the front, and it was weird that I didn't remember picking it up at all. Instead of putting it back, I put it in the VCR and watched as the static began to clear on the screen. I had been intending to watch some of the Winnie the Pooh episodes, but the bag of tapes would sit forgotten for quite some time. Mr. Harzows Corner would be the only thing I really cared about for the foreseeable future. The show appeared to be nothing special. It was clearly a Mr. Rogers knockoff, but the Mr. Harzow character was strange, yet endearing. He looked normal enough, a slight blonde guy, taller than your average kids show host, with a corduroy jacket and a pair of battered jeans that covered the tops of his Reebok sneakers. The camera showed him coming into a normal living room, again very reminiscent of Mr. Rogers, and then greeting everyone with a big smile and a waving hand. "Good afternoon, boys and girls. And of course, a very special afternoon to children of all ages. Welcome to Mr. Harzows Corner. Know that I am glad to see you, and that I am always here, just for you." As it went on, Mr. Harzows Corner turned out to be nothing like Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. Mr. Rogers often taught children life lessons about accepting people and being a friend, and lessons about how the world worked. Mr. Harzows Corner was more like having your own personal therapist inside your TV. Mr. Harzow taught no life lessons. He went on no adventures in make-believe. He just sat in his big easy chair with a cup of tea at his elbow and listened. First time I watched the episode, I was a little bit confused. After his greeting, he just leaned back and looked at me, smiling in a very strange way. His smile was warm, inviting even, but he seemed to be waiting for someone on the other end of the camera to begin talking. He just sat there staring at me, and I began to become a little creeped out. Even at 4, I knew it was a little bit unusual for adults to just sit there and stare at you. I remember reaching out to hit stop on the tape when suddenly Mr. Harzow cocked his head and seemed to speak directly to me. "Leaving so soon? I understand. Well, I'm glad you came to see me today. I hope you'll come again very soon." My finger stopped over the button. Was he talking to me? It seemed like he had been, but this was just a VHS tape. This was an age before interactive tapes, and the idea that the VHS could talk to you was a little eerie, but also a little bit interesting. When he had spoken directly to me, I remembered feeling a little sad that I was leaving already. He seemed like he understood, but maybe he was a little sad to see me go as well. I recalled my hand, and that big grin spread across his face again. "Changed your mind? I'm so glad. So why don't you tell me about your day? I'm sure I'd love to hear all about it." I sat for a moment, thinking about what to do. Finally, I told the smiling stranger on the tape about my day. I told him about my mother and going to the rummage sale, about finding his cassette tape, about bringing all the cassette tapes home, and discovering that his cassette tape was in with the ones I had bought. I told him I hoped I wouldn't get in trouble for having 6 instead of 5 cassette tapes, because my mother would think I had stolen it and she would get mad. Through it all, Mr. Harzow just sat and nodded, smiling his smile and listening as if I had the most interesting things in the world to talk about. Even at 4, though, I began to think that this was just someone pretending to listen. I remember thinking back to shows like Dora the Explorer, where Dora would ask a question and then pretend to listen to your answer. No matter what you told her to do, whether it was to go towards the next thing she had to do or sit in the grass and look at the clouds, she always came up with the right answer and went off to do what she was supposed to. I assumed that Mr. Harzow would do the same. He would interrupt me any minute now, just like Dora did if you spoke for too long, and start on some pre-scripted bit of dialogue. But he didn't. He sat and listened politely until I was done speaking. Then he nodded and answered me as if we were two people having a normal conversation. "It sounds as though it's been an exciting day for you. I'm glad you got to go and do something important, something that you enjoy. It's a real honor to be part of your life, and I hope we can be friends for many years to come." I spent the rest of the day in my room, talking with Mr. Harzow and telling him about my family, my home, and my life. He always seemed interested in my stories, and he always listened with that big smile and that fatherly way of talking about everything. My mom called me for dinner, and he said he would wait for me to come back. When I returned, he was still sitting and looking at the screen like I had never left. He asked me about dinner, and we talked until it was time for me to go to bed. "Will I see you tomorrow?" he asked, and I assured him that he would. I nearly left the TV on and just went to bed, but something told me that might be a bad idea. Not because the tape was cursed or haunted, but because Mom might come in and find it on. She might talk to Mr. Harzow, and Mr. Harzow might decide to be her friend instead of mine. The thought of losing Mr. Harzow, even after such a short time, made me feel furious, and I turned off the tape and went grudgingly to bed. I spent the next 5 months with my nose pressed against the TV screen, and Mr. Harzow listening to all my problems and woes. When my mom grounded me after the dog knocked the lamp over, he listened and consoled me. When my dad accidentally bumped me and I fell down the last 3 stairs, he was the one who told me it would all be okay. Every childhood problem, every unforeseen event, Mr. Harzow was there for me. It wasn't just that he listened. It wasn't even his advice that made me love him so. When Mr. Harzow talked to you, you felt like you were the most important person in the world. His attention was the most important thing you could ever have, and my 4-year-old brain drank that attention in. I became hesitant to leave the house, making up excuses why Mom couldn't go places, since I'd have to come with her. I wanted to spend every waking moment with my new friend, but something on the horizon would leave me with even less time with my dear Mr. Harzow. When I had to start kindergarten, Mr. Harzow told me how it would be new and exciting, and how he wanted to hear all about it when I got home. I attended kindergarten for about a week, coming straight home to lay on the floor of my room and talk with my new friend. When Mom got a new job. She had landed a job as a tech support supervisor for a new company, which meant she couldn't take me after school anymore. Dad worked in a prison, so he was almost always at work. It began to look like I might have to go into after-school care. I was understandably upset about this, because it would limit the already slim time I had to chat with Mr. Harzow. Fortunately, there was an alternative. My grandmother agreed to take me after school. My grandmother lived alone, my grandfather having died before I was born, and I think she was excited about watching me. Grandma had been very sad since my grandfather's passing, and it had turned her into a quiet shell of her former self. My mom always talked about what an outspoken and vivacious woman my grandmother had been when she was younger, and now it seemed like I might get to meet this new grandma. As bad as it sounds, I wasn't really all that interested in any of it, though. I simply wanted a place with a VHS player so I could watch my tape. At first, that was all we did, too. Grandma would pick me up from school, asking how my day had been, and asking what I might like to do once we got home, and I would tell her that I wanted to watch my tapes in the den. She would offer to bake cookies with me or maybe take me to the park, but I was fully invested in the silky voice of Mr. Harzow. I would come in and lay my book bag down and go sit in the den for hours as I talked quietly to my good friend about everything and anything. He smiled when I told him about my grandma and said it was nice that I was keeping her company. Grandmothers are such a valuable resource of knowledge, and the fact that you have such a good relationship with yours is truly special. I agreed, but I was still very guarded about the tape. I would often turn it off when Grandma brought me snacks or asked if I was interested in going outside. I didn't want her to see Mr. Harzow, and I think I was still afraid that she would take him away from me if she saw him. She would want him to be her friend, and then I would be unable to see him since he would want to spend all his time with her. Mr. Harzow never said as much. All of his advice was placidly given through the TV after he had sat and listened to me. But I knew that if I coveted this tape, then others might as well. Over time, Grandma did manage to coax me out of the den. I was 5 after all, and the smell of cookies or the promise of ice cream had a talismanic effect on me still. Mr. Harzow became an after-dinner friend, a rainy day friend, but I still found myself wanting to spend as much time with him as I could. No matter what I was doing, playing on the swings or sitting in class or making cookies with Grandma or even sleeping in my bed, it seemed that I was thinking about Mr. Harzow. I would find myself hungry for any time I could get with him, and there were nights that I quietly whispered to him from the floor of my room as my parents slept not too far away. It didn't come to a head until I got careless at Grandma's house one day. It had been the best day my 6-year-old brain could remember. Grandma had taken me to the local carnival, more of a street fair than a regular fair, and I had done it all. I had ridden ponies, I had eaten so much I thought I would bust, I had seen clowns and jugglers and listened to bands, and for a moment I'd even stopped feeling the tug of Mr. Harzow. We came home and I ate dinner, and Grandma asked me if I wanted some TV time before my mom came to pick me up. I said I did, and I rushed off to tell Mr. Harzow about all the exciting things I had done and seen, and he laughed and told me how much fun it all sounded like. As he spoke, I remember yawning as his pleasant voice drifted over me, and when I felt my face drifting towards the carpet, I don't even think I was aware I was going to sleep. When I woke up in my bed the next morning, I was confused. When I couldn't find my videotape in my bag before school, I was frantic. I thought about it the whole way to school and decided that I must have left it at Grandma's house. I had fallen asleep in front of the little TV in the guest room, and so the tape must still be there. I figured it wouldn't be a problem. Grandma was going to come pick me up after school, so I could get it while I was there. When my mom picked me up instead, I was a little bit confused. "Sorry, sweetie, but Grandma's sick, so she can't take you today." Mom had taken off work for the afternoon to pick me up, and I spent the afternoon walking around the house like a junkie. I hadn't been without my tape for the last few years, so being without it now was like torture. I tried to go out and play, but I just couldn't get interested in any of the games. I tried to watch TV, but none of my favorite shows seemed to hold my attention. I just walked around aimlessly, wanting to talk to Mr. Harzow. I'd had a pretty good day that day. He would want to hear about it. He would want to hear about how my team had won at dodgeball, about how my sculpture had been praised by the teacher in art class, about how I'd made a new friend. Not being able to tell him was torture, but I knew I had to stay strong. Grandma would be better tomorrow. I just knew it. It turned out Grandma was sick that whole week, though. By the end of that week, I was becoming a mess. My parents just saw it as me being a hyperactive kid, but I felt like I was actually going through withdrawals. Sometimes I would just lie on the floor, knees tucked to my chest, and hyperventilate. I remember vividly the feeling of my breath as it rushed out and rasped wetly against my skin. I remember feeling like I might vomit, but being unable to bring up anything. I remember my dad finally taking me and putting me in my room one Saturday, because I had done nothing for 3 hours but stare at the ceiling and shudder. This will sound dramatic to you as you sit in your nice warm house. You'll think I was just overreacting or being a spoiled child who couldn't get their way. Some of you, though, the ones who have loved something self-destructive and lived through it, might understand what it was like. After a week, I asked my mom if maybe we could go visit Grandma. I told my mom I was worried about her and wanted to see her. We were driving back from school, Grandma having been sick all week, and the idea suddenly occurred to me that maybe we could go check on her. Anything at this point to get my fix. Mom had knocked about 20 times when she finally used the spare key to open the lock and head inside. I was in as soon as the gap in the door was big enough. The house looked different, but I hardly noticed. I was charging down the hall to the guest room, Mom calling for my grandmother as she came inside behind me. The door to the little guest room was ajar, and I crashed through it and knelt before the silent altar of that cold little TV on the floor. I pushed the button, but nothing happened. I pushed it again, but still nothing happened. I peeked into the VCR slot and found it empty. Someone had taken my tape. I came hobbling from the room on all fours, probably possessed of that "give us the precious" look old Smeagol showed to Frodo far too often. I heard Mom in the kitchen, still looking for my grandma, but I only had one thing on my mind. Mr. Harzow had to be here somewhere. At the bottom of the stairs, I stopped, cocking my head like a dog as I listened. I could hear him. I could hear Mr. Harzow. I could hear the melodic sound of his voice. I could hear the soothing tones that had so often told me that everything would be fine. I had craved that voice for the past 7 days, and now it was so close I could almost taste it. I ambled up the stairs as quiet as I could, pressing my ear to the door of my grandma's room. I could hear him telling her how he understood her woes and commiserated with her sorrow. I shoved the door open, looking into the squalor that had become my grandmother's room. It was filthy. A smell like waste just left to drop where it would assaulted my nose, along with the smell of spoiled food. Grandma was perched on the bed like a gargoyle, her eyes glued to the little TV on the nightstand. The glow from it illuminated her face like a death mask. It had only been a week, but she looked so haggard and so old that it almost scared me to look at her. She jumped when I screamed at her to give me back my tape. She covered the TV, the screen making her eyes shine with lust as the two of us yelled at each other like angry cats. I told her how unfair it was that she could just take things from me and demanded that she give it back. She said it was her tape now and that she would never give it back. In the background, I could also hear the consoling voice of Mr. Harzow as he told us to both find a compromise and that fighting was never the answer. I could hear Mom downstairs, her feet pounding up the hardwood, the sound of us fighting having galvanized her. Mom walked in just as Grandma dealt me a vicious slap across the cheek, rocking my head to the side and sending me sprawling to the floor. I can remember the two of them shouting at each other as easily as I can remember my favorite television show. They never came to blows, but it was very close a few times. Mom wanted to know just what the hell was going on. Grandma kept shrieking that she wanted us out, all the while clutching her murky television set. She said we were not welcome here anymore. She said she never wanted to see us again. She said that she would call the police if we didn't leave immediately. All the while, I could hear Mr. Harzow whispering for her not to do such a thing, for her to work out her problems, to reconcile with her loved ones. Far from making her see reason, hearing her voice only seemed to harden her resolve. Hearing his voice only made me want to bask in the glow of that murky television set all the more. Finally, we left, my mother weeping openly as she dragged me kicking and screaming down the stairs. That was the last time I heard his voice. For 12 years. You would say that after 12 years I might have forgotten about Mr. Harzow. You might think that after 12 years I would have surely moved on with my life. You might assume that I would find other hobbies and interests besides talking to a man that lives inside a VHS tape. You would be wrong. Dead wrong. When it became apparent that I couldn't get the tape back, I started searching. This was the early days of the internet, and I started furiously pursuing information online about similar tapes or similar programs. I didn't find much. There were a handful of people who were clearly just playing around, a few others who were trying to use the tape, and my obvious desire for it, to lure me into something terrible. Neither of these bothered me much, but the others showed me something I didn't want to see. Becky and Steven were two users I spoke to on a forum who believed they had actually come into contact with Mr. Harzow. Both had the kind of conversations with me that smack addicts likely had with each other. They spoke of their time with him lovingly, their words painting a picture of almost worshipful need. Becky said she had spent 10 years with Mr. Harzow before her mother had taken her television and thrown it out. She locked Becky in her room, and Becky had been forced to watch the truck come and take the TV, VHS and all away forever. Steven had a similar story, but his tape had been destroyed in a fire when his house had burned to the ground. That was 2 years ago when I found them, and I had no idea how much they would affect my search. About a year after meeting Steven, he stopped talking altogether. Becky and I assumed that something must have happened to him. He had been teetering lately, rolling in the memories of his time with Mr. Harzow, like a dog rolling in a smell it likes, and he had been talking about self-harm a lot. When he didn't sign on for about a week, Becky and I assumed he had finally had enough of dwelling on something that he couldn't have. His last message read, "I'll be with him soon." Becky, on the other hand, saw an opportunity that I never would have foreseen. She had been asking a lot of very loaded questions about where I lived, and more importantly, where my grandmother lived. You see, Grandma was still alive, even after 12 years of living under Mr. Harzow's watchful eye. No one had seen her, no one had heard from her, and she just sort of lived off her retirement and her slowly deteriorating house. I had walked by a few times, trying to find a way inside while she was away, but she never left. Her groceries were delivered, her mail spilled from her box, and she simply existed inside her crumbling tomb. I saw what Becky was after, and refused to tell her where she could find my tape. Becky, it seems, was more resourceful than I had thought, though. About a week ago, Mom got a call that Grandma had died. The police told us that someone had broken into her house, probably thinking it was abandoned, and found her in her bedroom. The two had fought, and despite her age, Grandma had strangled them to death. Her heart, however, wasn't quite as strong as her hands, and she had died with her fingers pressed into the flesh of the intruder. The intruder had been identified as Rebecca Smythe, a resident of California, who seemed to have driven 800 miles just to break into my grandmother's house. It seemed that my internet friend had finally pinpointed where my grandmother lived, and it had been the end of her. The night after the funeral, I made my move. I broke a window around back, we no longer had a key to the house, and made my way through the unfamiliar squalor. The house was a wreck, junk and garbage piled everywhere, and when I finally found the stairs, I breathed a sigh of relief. They were sagging, the wood groaning as I walked up them, but they were still intact, and my prize was within reach. The TV was on the nightstand, its soft glow illuminating the bed where Grandma had breathed her last. The tape sat in the murky light, like a red invitation or a jolly splash of blood. I've been holding it, feeling its red plastic in my fingers for nearly an hour, as I contemplate whether or not to slide it in. It's not a question of whether I will or not. I have missed Mr. Harzow desperately for the last 12 years, but I wanted to take down this story before I give my life back to him. You may think this is his fault somehow, but I cannot blame him for what has happened. He told my grandma on that long ago day to reconcile with us. He never told me to hurt anyone. He never told me to be unkind to anyone. I think that's why people seek him. When Mr. Harzow speaks, you feel as though he speaks only for you. He accepts you, no matter what, and that kind of power is intoxicating. The TV accepted the tape in just the same way it always had, and now he's smiling at me and welcoming me back as an old friend. I think I'll go speak with my old friend for a while. I think I'll go speak with him for the rest of my life.
One more story, and then I think I'm off to the land of Nod for a little while. But I know how much you guys enjoy my furry friends, so I thought I might save the best for last. I'm sure that we all have pets that we're proud of, that do strange and wondrous things. Maybe they do some things we're not so proud of, but that is the nature of pet ownership, I suppose. So, when the subject of today's story has a cat who catches a rat, let's see what kind of snowball effect that has on his life in general.
It was a pretty normal thing to ask of a cat. Catch the rat and get your reward. I moved recently, and somehow I got a rat in my stuff. The apartment I had moved from was kind of a dump, but I'd never had a problem with rats. So when I opened the box and out came a big black wharf rat, I nearly had a heart attack. It came barreling out of the box and ran right behind my stove, all three of my cats watching it curiously from the top of the couch where they were perched. I remember glowering at them, little cowards, but being madder at Calvin more than the others. The other two were little more than kittens, half-grown and barely out of eating dry food soaked in gravy. Calvin, however, was a full-grown cat. I hadn't set out to have 3 cats in a one-bedroom apartment, of course. It just kind of happened by mistake. Calvin had been a birthday present from my mom. He'd been a scrawny little orange kitten, and she had meant for him to keep me company in my new studio apartment. She had pulled him out of her pocket with a little flourish, and I had sighed as I tried to refuse him. He was very cute, his inquisitive amber eyes looking around with curiosity, but I really didn't want something to take care of right now. Keep him for the weekend. If you still don't want him, I'll come back and get him, she said. By Monday, you couldn't have taken him from me by any means less than high explosive. He was a playful little thing, always zooming around and getting into trouble, and I spent many nights with him curled up in my lap or sitting on my feet as I went to sleep. After a few months, though, he became kind of sluggish and mopey. I talked to a friend of mine, and she said he was probably lonely. She told me that cats are social creatures, and that it might perk him up if he had a little playmate. I talked to Mom, and she told me that the lady she'd gotten Calvin from had just had another litter of kittens. Calvin's brother cousin would probably be ready to leave his mom soon, and I could have a little friend for Calvin to play with. That's how Hobbs came to be my new addition. Before he could even arrive, though, I found Grayson. I was just walking through the Dollar General parking lot, just wanting to get a few things for dinner, when this pathetic little mew from under a giant truck caught my attention. He was a half-starved little gray kitten, scared and lost and looking for help. He was too small to even fight me when I picked him up and put him in my shirt pocket. I picked up a few things while I was inside, a water bowl and some wet food, and Grayson joined my growing little brood of cats. Calvin hated him at first, hissing and spitting at this interloper. But after a few weeks, I saw them playing and running together like old friends. Grayson seemed to idolize Calvin, and when I brought Hobbs home, the two of them hissed and spit at him until they finally accepted him as part of their world. The Littles, as I started calling them, followed Calvin around ceaselessly, and he was a good big brother and showed them how to be productively mischievous, as house cats often are. Then, when I got a raise at work, finally making the sort of money that could change my life, I moved out of my dingy studio apartment and into a nice 2-bedroom in a better part of town. And now, I had a rat. I spent the first 2 weeks in my new apartment ignoring him. I could hear him scuttling around, but I hoped he would leave on his own. I had 3 cats after all. Rats are supposed to leave if they smell a cat, right? This fellow didn't care about the existence of my timid little felines, though. He ate my snack cakes from the cupboard, torn into my breakfast cereal, and chewed holes in my bread and dry goods. After the 3rd morning of grabbing a cereal box and finding the contents spilling out onto the linoleum, I got angry. That's when I started trying to get rid of the damn rat. I put out traps, I put down glue boards, I bought poison and put it out in places that I knew would be hard for the cats to get to. I filled any hole I could find with steel wool and spray foam and hot pepper granules. When that failed to get the results, I hired an exterminator to come and have a look. To my surprise, he put down traps and bait and said he'd be back in a week. I rolled my eyes after he left, thinking that I had already done all that. When that failed to get any result too, I started getting desperate. I bought those little noise generator things that are supposed to drive rats crazy. I bought candles that are supposed to make them go nuts. I used essential oils and left out different smelly foods that are supposed to drive them away. Nothing made any progress, though. That's when I really started to get angry at my cats. I shouldn't have taken out my frustration on them, but I was becoming ridiculous. There's 3 of you. How is it that you can't catch one freaking rat? He's been eating your cat food too, you know, chewing holes straight into the bag. Are you really going to let him get away with that? The 3 of them just stared at me blankly, not understanding a damn thing I said. Okay, how about this? The first one of you who gets that rat gets a can of wet food. The good stuff, too. The $3 a can stuff. That seemed to perk them up. Once the cats were out of kittenhood, I had weaned all of them off of wet food. I hadn't given them wet food in nearly 6 months, and they had spent the last 3 months mewing and looking at me expectantly anytime I opened a can of soup or ravioli. Cats aren't stupid. I had always suspected as much, and the way the 2 smaller ones looked at each other left little doubt that they were plotting something. Grayson and Hobbs were younger than Calvin, and they often worked together to manage mischief pretty well. Calvin, on the other hand, looked thoughtfully and stared off at the kitchen. Later that night, as I curled up in bed, I noticed that Calvin was missing from my usual cuddle pile. Grayson was sprawled across my chest, Hobbs laying on my pillow as his fluffy body lay across the top of my head, but Calvin's comfortable weight was absent from my legs. Calvin had slept across my legs every night since he'd come to stay with me, and it was strange now to be thinking about sleep without him there. I called him, patting the bed and pss-pss-pssing at him, but he refused to come to bed. Finally, I just rolled over and went to sleep. He'd turn up. When he finally turned up, it was to show me the dead wharf rat dangling from his teeth. I woke up slowly as the big yellow cat put his paws on my chest. I opened my eyes and saw the dead rat hanging inches from my face. I struggled awake, startled back to consciousness, as the cat proudly held the rat by the tail and dangled it in front of me. The other 2 came sniffing around, looking reverently at Calvin and his prize, but he hissed and spit as he scared them back. This was his prize alone. He followed me into the kitchen, the rat still swinging as I looked through the cabinets for any wet food we might have left over. I found a can of Old Fancy Feast, something I had picked up for a special occasion, and when it went plop into the bowl, he dropped the rat and began to eat. As he dipped his head to eat, I got my first look at the rat. It was unbloodied, its fur unruffled from a fight, and the way its body had curled made me think that Calvin had jumped on him and broken his back. I swept him into a dustpan and dumped him out onto the fire escape, leaving him out there for the scavengers to pick apart. I heard Calvin hiss at the littles as they came close, scattering them before he went back to eating. I reflected that it might have been a mistake to introduce Calvin to wet food again. Calvin had, after all, been the hardest to break. He had never really had it before the kittens came into the house, to my knowledge. He'd been big enough for dry food when Mom brought him to me. Until Grayson had come, he had never had a taste. Grayson had been small, much smaller than Calvin, and I had quickly learned that they could not eat anywhere near each other. Calvin would take Grayson's food without hesitation, snarfing up all the wet food as quickly as possible. It didn't seem to matter if it made him sick or not. He would fill his belly with as much wet food as he could get, and then flop down in a contented ball. It got to the point where I had to feed Grayson in my bedroom, the poor little kitten wasting away as his food was stolen again and again. I did the same with Hobbs, but Calvin still seemed to find a way to take their food sometimes. Calvin was sneaky, and when his amber eyes found something they wanted, he tended to get it. I should have known when he flopped over, his belly full, that this wouldn't be the last. The next night, as I was getting ready for bed, I walked into my room and yelped in horror as I nearly tripped over a second dead rat. This one was a little smaller, a little more normal rat-sized than the wharf rat Calvin had brought me the night before. As I inspected it, he crept silently up and butted my leg. He looked pleased with himself, looking at me expectantly as he waited for his prize. I tried to be supportive of his latest kill, admonishing him as I put out what little wet food I still had. I made a mental note to get more tomorrow. He watched me smugly as I came home with 2 more cans, hoping I wouldn't need them. He took that night off, but the next night, 2 small mice were in front of my bedroom door. This was becoming ridiculous. How was my apartment this infested? I hadn't seen so much as a roach or a mouse turd anywhere other than from the big rat that Calvin had killed. Not in the cabinets, not behind the fridge, not anywhere. Suddenly, Calvin was turning up with 4 to 5 times the number of rodents I had thought I had. And that was a problem. I made a note to call an exterminator the next day and disposed of the carcasses. I gave him the wet food and went to bed, figuring I would have a long day tomorrow. I called the exterminator on my lunch break, and he agreed to come out that afternoon. He met me at the door to my apartment, wearing an orange jumpsuit and carrying a heavy can of poison. He introduced himself as Mark. He asked me what I had going on, and I told him that my cats had been catching a lot of vermin since I moved in. He said that was pretty common, especially this close to the canal, and he said he'd have a look. The littles immediately came over to rub up against him, but I noticed that Calvin was keeping his distance. He looked at the exterminator distrustfully, keeping his perch atop the bookcase as his tail flicked unhappily. Mark set to work immediately, checking under the counters and shining his UV light around as he tried to find the rat's sign. He went through the kitchen, the bathroom, my bedroom, and finally checked the living room before making his way into my office. He said he hadn't found any rat sign, other than a small amount of scat under the sink. He said it looked like a single rat might have been here briefly, but that would explain the stowaway I found in my belongings. But what about the other 3, I asked. Mark shrugged. No clue. I'll come back in a week and check the glue traps, but I don't think I'll find anything. I told him I'd call him if anything changed, and he left after a few more pets from the littles and a few more glowers from Calvin. That night, Calvin came up with another rat. I praised him again, but I was beginning to wonder where he was coming up with all these rats. By the end of the week, it was really starting to get out of hand. Calvin had brought me a total of 10 rats throughout the week, as well as 2 roaches and a grasshopper. He had eaten wet food every night that week, and the littles were clearly starting to feel some sort of way about it. They woofed down their dry food, but I could see a lot of hooded glances towards Calvin as he dined on canned food. I was tempted to give them all wet food, but that would only make it harder to break the cycle once the rats stopped appearing. No, eventually Calvin would stop finding rats and bringing them to me, and the whole thing would just go away. Then, Hobbs decided to change the game. After feeding everyone and making sure their water bowls were full one night, I was heading to bed when I stopped in front of the door and looked for Calvin's latest offering. Calvin had been leaving me offerings there since the first night he had brought me the giant rat, and tonight was the first night in a while that I hadn't almost stepped on a dead mouse or a rat on the way to bed. I looked around, thinking he had left it near the door, but there was nothing. Calvin came up then, looking proud of himself, but seemed confused when he couldn't find anything. That's when Hobbs strolled up with a dead mouse swinging from his teeth. Hobbs laid the mouse at my feet, and I bent to congratulate him on his kill. He accepted my pets, eyes straying to Calvin, and I could swear that Calvin stared hatefully at him. It's hard to tell with cats sometimes. Their faces can be a little inexpressive if you're not used to them. Still, I saw Calvin crinkle his eyes and glower at Hobbs, the same way he had glowered at the exterminator. He sat on his bookcase and stared daggers at the little kitten as he ate his wet food. I looked at the 2 of them, wondering if I should leave them alone out here. I shrugged it off, though. They had never tried to hurt each other before, aside from some playful wrestling, and when Grayson followed me to bed, I tipped the door a little so they could come to bed when they were finished. The next morning, though, there was no sign of Hobbs. There was no sign of a struggle either. Everything was as I had left it the night before. The door was locked. The floors were clean. Nothing was amiss at all. It was as if Hobbs had simply vanished. I asked around the apartment complex, hoping maybe he had gotten out, but no one had seen hide nor tail of the little guy. I came home feeling very upset, and Grayson and Calvin tried their best to comfort me. I went to bed with Grayson curled up on my chest, missing the fluffy weight of Hobbs at my head. Calvin, however, stayed out in the living room. He seemed forever on the hunt these days. A week went by, and I still found myself filling Hobbs's bowl and calling for him at bedtime. Grayson was becoming standoffish towards Calvin. I usually came home to find them apart, staring at each other apprehensively. Calvin, on the other hand, pranced around like the lord of the house. There was at least one mouse or rat by the door of my room every night at bedtime, and Calvin was becoming larger than I thought a cat his size should be. He had been the size of a normal house cat a month ago, but now he was approaching the size of a small wild cat. I had chalked it up to all the wet food, but then the other rodents started showing up. On Monday, Calvin brought me a white rat. Calvin had started bringing them to me himself, lest we have another Hobbs incident where someone else took credit for his handiwork. When he set it down, I remembered thinking that it seemed oddly filled out for a wild rat. The rat had been taken care of and looked as though it had been fed regularly. I gave Calvin a hard look, but he only looked at me mildly with those amber eyes as if to say, "It's a rat, wet food now." I sighed and opened him a can, Grayson following closely at my heels as we went to bed. On Tuesday, Calvin brought me a squirrel. It was clearly a squirrel, though the tail had been chewed off. It wasn't a baby squirrel either, or some half-starved yearling. This was a full-grown squirrel that my cat was trying to pass off as a rat. I gave him the food, but I told him not to lure squirrels into the house anymore. He pretended to listen, relishing his wet food as he ate. On Wednesday, Calvin brought me a hamster. There was no disguising this one. He was red and white, his little cheeks stuffed with seeds, and by this point, I was making excuses. Maybe it had crawled in from the vents. Maybe someone's pet had gotten loose and wandered into the apartment. There was no way Calvin could get out of the apartment, right? On Thursday, Calvin brought me a guinea pig. He didn't even try to hide his smugness this time. Calvin flopped the fat little sausage of a rodent down and looked up at me expectantly. His eyes, had they always been that color? I remember them being more amber than crimson. Maybe it was a trick of the light. Perhaps I was just seeing things. My hands shook as I opened the can, and I closed the door this time as I went to bed. Calvin had grown another 3 inches seemingly overnight, and I was having a harder and harder time discerning his growth patterns without apprehension. Then, on Friday, I came home from work to find my landlord out in the hallway. I just thought I'd ask if maybe you'd seen my chinchilla. I told him I didn't know what a chinchilla looked like, to be honest, and he sighed. "It's my daughter's. It's missing. I paid over $1,000 for that little monster, and now he's just suddenly disappeared. If you see him, please let me know." I was waiting for Calvin that night when he came trotting in, the chinchilla holed snugly between his teeth. That's when I lost my temper with him. I told him this was unacceptable. He couldn't just go around killing people's pets. He had probably been catching other pets and killing them as well, and I was tired of it. I grabbed him by the scruff of the neck, and Calvin yowled miserably as I dragged him to the pet carrier. I put him in and locked the door, the spring locks keeping it shut. He could spend the night in the carrier to think about what he had done. He yowled and morowled as Grayson and I went to bed. I heard him kicking around in there as I tried to sleep. After a little while, though, he quieted, and I finally went to bed. I woke up to an empty bed, though. I looked around for Grayson, expecting to have him curled up next to me, and finding nothing. Again, there was no sign of a struggle, no blood or evidence of foul play, just a lack of cat and a sense of absence. I left the room, my eyes inevitably straying to the cat carrier in the corner as I searched the house for Grayson. Calvin and Hobbs had been like children to me, but Grayson had been special, even amongst my cats. I felt like I had saved him, like I had kept him from dying, and now he was gone. I had to halt my search, to stop myself from sobbing more than once. After I'd checked every room in the house, every hiding place, every nook and cranny, I turned my attention back to the pet carrier. It had been silent the whole time, unmoving and seemingly empty. I moved in slowly, not sure what to expect. Was Calvin dead too? He had spent a lot of time last night yowling, and now he was as silent as the grave. I bent low, putting my face near the mesh and looking in to find nothing. The pet carrier was empty. I jumped when someone knocked on my door, their thumping sounding frantic. It was the landlord again, and he looked very pale. "Excuse me, I'm going door to door. Have you seen, I mean," he lost what little composure he had, and I felt his face press against my shoulder, his tears moistening my shirt. "My son's missing. Have you seen anyone who might have taken him? I put him to bed in his crib last night, and when I woke up this morning, he was just gone. His mother's nearly catatonic, and the police can't find any evidence of a break-in. I don't know what to do. I'm seeing if anyone has seen anything. It's all I know to do." I commiserated with him, telling him that I would let him know if I saw anything. But my guts were already a-roil with fear. Surely he hadn't. There was no way. He was there on the coffee table as I closed the door, tail flicking in agitation. There was something in his mouth, something thick and pink, and as he rose up and sauntered over to me, I backed away, not wanting to see what it was. He was leaving little red splotches on the floor in his wake as he carried the strange offering to me, and I was even more certain that I didn't want it anywhere near me. However, when my bottom came up hard against the door, I was out of room to retreat. He lay the offering at my feet, looking up coldly with none of his usual smugness, and staying put to watch as I pushed it over with the toe of my shoe. Even without the toes, I could tell it was a small, delicate foot that someone had unceremoniously detached from the owner. The foot of an infant, if I had to guess. He's out there now, eating his wet food as I lay in bed with the doors locked. I flushed the remains of the small foot down the toilet. It flushed surprisingly easy, but I saw Calvin watching me the whole time from the door. All he does now is watch me, and I'm frankly afraid to touch him. He's different, not really like a cat anymore, and when he tried to jump in my lap earlier, I pushed him away. I just can't stand to have him near me. However, I'll be giving him his wet food from now on, rat or no rat. I'm afraid of what might happen if I let him get too hungry.
Another day and another great bunch of stories come to an end. But don't be too sad, because I'll be back again with more cozy horror and more great times spent with yours truly, Dr. Plague. Until then, have a wonderful day and a spooky evening.